Good afternoon. I do hope everyone is doing well today. This week's discussion was to look at the Oxford ebook collection for sources that were related to our dissertation topics. Again, for me, my topic is the strategic bombing of Germany during the Second World War. I was disappointed in the Oxford database, for I found very few sources that were related to strategic bombing. After an extensive keyword search, I ultimately only found three sources that related to true strategic bombing during the Second World War. One book I found was an edited book titled Lectures of the Air Corps Tactical School and American Strategic Bombing in World War II. For those of you who are not familiar with the school, it was created prior to the Second World War to look at the feasibility of strategic bombing and ultimately come up with a doctrine that could be implemented in the next war. This book is a series of lectures given at the school that looked at various aspects of strategic bombing, from the idea of the doctrine of that high altitude precision daylight bombing to lectures on the technology that would be needed, lectures that looked at targets that were believed to be the most vulnerable against an enemy, and what would be the best targets to hamper their war-making abilities. There's even a lecture given on how the bombers would always get through, and even one how strategic bombing may be able to win a war, all by itself. This is probably the best source of the three that I found. A second one is a biography written by Brian Lassley, titled The Architect of Air Power, General Lawrence S. Cutter and the Birth of the U.S. Air Force. Cutter is kind of a lesser known figure, but he's still very significant. He is there at the tactical school. He is one of the architects of the strategic bombing doctrine. He also eventually is sent to England with the first wave of American bombers and American airmen. And he was responsible for much of the logistics in the early years of the war, and the logistics, of course, that would help with implement strategic bombing of Germany. The third book, Jürgen Brauer and Herbert von Tuyll, Tuyll, their book is titled Castles, Battles, and Bombs, How Economics Explain Military History. There is one chapter that is dedicated to strategic bombing of Germany, that it looks at, of course, from an economic standpoint. It looks at assessing the effectiveness of strategic bombing from purely an economic perspective by looking at, in this case, the U.S. and Britain's war-making production and how much was the cost in creating the planes, the bombs, the training of airmen, and so on, and the success of the bombing raids, how much material and manpower were spent in trying to destroy Germany's war-making abilities. The chapter also looks at it from the German perspective on how they were able to rebuild their factories, get their factories up and running, and keep producing the materials they needed to fight the war. Ultimately, the argument is made that strategic bombing of Germany's war-making abilities was fairly ineffective. It minimally was effective from a cost standpoint, because Germany was always able to get their factories up and running. It did hamper Germany's war-making ability, but from an economic standpoint, according to the authors, from that standpoint, it just wasn't very effective in ending Germany's ability to make weapons of war. But anyway, those are the three sources for this week, and I hope everyone is well, and everyone have a wonderful day. Thank you for listening.